Hello everybody, and welcome to Theology 101. Today I'm going to talk about the problem of divorce. The reason why Jesus talks about divorce is because the Pharisees wanted to know legitimate ways to get out of a marriage so that they can get with another person they lust after. So Jesus addresses this problem. It was also said, whoever divorces his wife, let him give her a certificate of divorce. Jesus is quoting Deuteronomy chapter 24 verses 1 through 4, which is the only Old Testament law that addressed divorce. When a man takes a wife and marries her, if then she finds no favor in his eyes because he has found some indecency in her, and he writes her a certificate of divorce and puts it in her hand and sends her out of his house, and she departs out of his house, and if she goes and becomes another man's wife, and the latter man hates her and writes her a certificate of divorce and puts it in her hand and sends her out of his house, or if the latter man dies who took her to be his wife, then her former husband who sent her away may not take her again to be his wife after she has been defiled, for that is an abomination before the Lord. And you shall not bring sin upon the land that the Lord your God is giving you for an inheritance. The context of these verses is to protect women. You see, this law prevents a husband from kicking out his wife, thus leaving her without income. So if he has a legitimate reason to divorce her, then he must give a certificate which will give her the right to marry someone else. Also, the certificate will protect the woman's life from capital punishment, since people might have assumed she committed adultery, which is a capital crime. So the purpose of this law was not God commanding his people to divorce. It was to protect women from being financially vulnerable or from capital punishment if their husbands decided to divorce them. However, by the time you get to Jesus, the Jewish men twisted this law to allow them to get out of their marriages. They would threaten their wives with divorce for any reason. For example, Jewish men would divorce their wives if they burned their meals, or if they didn't like how they looked, or if they couldn't bear them any sons. So referencing this law, Jesus says this, "But I say to you that everyone who divorces his wife, except on the ground of sexual immorality, makes her commit adultery, and whoever marries a divorced woman commits adultery." What does the phrase sexual immorality mean? It is where we get our word pornography. It can refer to relations with a prostitute, fornication, or adultery. Jesus says that the point of the Old Testament law was not to command divorce, but to permit it in cases where reconciliation was not possible because of adultery. But if the divorce is on any other grounds, then both parties are guilty of adultery if they get remarried. In other words, divorce causes adultery if adultery is not the cause of divorce. Now, why is adultery such a big deal to God? According to God, your spouse is the only person in your life that you will be one with. You are not one flesh with your friends. You are not one flesh with your parents. You are not even one flesh with your kids. Your spouse is the only person you are one flesh with. And part of being one flesh means that you share everything physical with one another. There is a physical intimacy that is reserved only for those who are one flesh. Sex is not like any other bodily function. It is not like going to the bathroom. Sex is more than a physical act. Why? During sex, you are not just uniting with another person physically, but also emotionally and spiritually. So when a person commits adultery, they fracture that one flesh union he or she has with their spouse. Adultery has already destroyed the unity of a marriage. To get divorced is to simply acknowledge the fracture that already exists to that marriage. But if a person terminates a marriage outside of adultery, then he or she is disconnecting with the person they are still one flesh with. Jesus adds that when a man divorces his wife, when she has not committed adultery, then he causes his wife to commit adultery. What does he mean? If you divorce your wife and give her a certificate, then you are freeing her up to marry another man. But that paper does not dissolve the marriage union. So even if the law recognizes it as a divorce, Jesus says that God does not view it that way. The point is that people cannot dissolve a marriage. Only God or adultery can dissolve the union that exists in a marriage. Now you might be wondering, when can a person remarry? Some people falsely assume that Jesus is saying that we can never get remarried no matter what. But the context would go against that interpretation. When Jesus talks about divorce without the possibility of remarriage, he is talking about an illegitimate divorce. The Old Testament law allowed divorce and remarriage, because God knew that the hardness of our hearts require provisions for marriages that will become fractured. In other words, we live in a broken world where even if we wanted to stay married, our spouse might want to abandon us anyway. Or maybe we were the victims of adultery. Or some people might be victims of physical abuse. Jesus is not saying that we are to stay in every marriage and never remarry. His condemnation of remarriage is on the grounds that the divorce was not legitimate, and so the original marriage remains valid in the sight of God. Ideally, in a perfect world, there would be no adultery, no abuse, no abandonment, so there will be no reason to divorce. But sadly, Jesus knows that this is not the case and concedes that there are legitimate reasons to divorce because the unity in that marriage has been broken. You see, in a perfect world, none of us will need health insurance. Nobody will get sick or die from cancer or other terminal illnesses. But does that mean that Jesus is against health insurance? No. Why? Because he knows we don't live in a world without sin, but in a broken world filled with sin and its effects, which includes diseases. In the same way, in a perfect world, there will be no need for God to even mention divorce. But God knows that he must provide a provision for divorce because we live in a broken world. But there will come a time when sin ends, which means divorce will no longer exist. In God's kingdom, there will never be broken marriages because there will only be one marriage between Christ and the church, and that marriage will never end. We see a picture of this perfect marriage in God's kingdom. Then I heard what seemed to be the voice of a great multitude, like the roar of many waters, and like the sound of mighty peals of thunder, crying out, "Hallelujah! For the Lord our God, the Almighty reigns. Let us rejoice and exult and give him the glory. For the marriage of the Lamb has come, and his bride has made herself ready. It was granted her to clothe herself with fine linen, bright and pure." Even if you might not experience a perfect marriage in this broken world, or you might have gone through a broken marriage yourself, I want you to know that you can look forward to the day where you will be in a perfect marriage with Jesus forever. But until that day comes, as Jesus' kingdom citizens, fight for your marriages because they are pictures to the world of how much Christ loves his church. Love your spouse as Christ loved you. And even if your spouse does not return that love, know that Christ will always love you and will never divorce you. Thank you to today's sponsor, On Reverence. They offer a free digital worship music app called Maskell. If you want to find out more, I'll leave some links below in the description box. If you missed the last video about the problem of adultery, I'll leave a link here for you to watch. And until next time, see you.